Welcome back, book nerds. This is Library Card. I'm Megan Glyona. I'm here with Brian Brinkman and Mr. RJB. And this is the show for people who want to think deeply about the books they read and get inspired to read more. Today, we're going to be talking about Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And we're going to get into this Booker award-winning novel soon. But first, I want to hear what you're reading. Brian, what are you reading these days?
Everything. So much.
So
Nonstop.
much.
Let's see. I'm in the middle. I'm like 30 pages from the end of Stag Dance, which I should finish this evening. Which is magical and mystical, and I'm really excited for us to talk about it. I just started listening to Mark Dunkelman's Why Nothing Works, which is like the historical companion to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance, which does just such a great job of, putting into context the way I love things put into context. Progressivism over the last 100 years and where it's succeeded, where it's had problems, where we are today, what we can do to overcome government stagnation. Really, really exciting stuff. Going to be one of my favorite books of the year. Yeah, that's where I'm living right now. I'm still in Tom Robbins' world. We'll be out of there pretty soon as well. I'm in that RJB period of my life. This is like Picasso had his blue period. I have my RJ period. It's happening right now.
It's a pretty good period to be in. RJ, where are we headed next? What are you reading? What's next for us?
Let's see. I just finished a book called what was it called? Held, which is pretty good. I think it's actually kind of comparable to Orbital in a way, which I'll bring up later. I just started this book called Dream State, which, Brian, you'd be excited to know takes place in Montana.
Oh, I own it. I'm getting ready to read it once I finish
Okay.
my RJB period. Yeah, go on.
I would say that so far it reminds me that writing doesn't necessarily have to be great for a story to be great.
Oh, interesting.
But I mean that in
what a pitch,
Yeah.
baby.
I mean
like
that in a
compliment
complimentary
and a dig. Yeah.
I mean that in a complimentary way. Like the past several books I've read have been very like literary. Like you know, and it's and they're like they're hard sometimes. But like this book is just it's sort of like fun but also good. I don't know. That's my takeaway. I've listened to probably 30 or 40 episodes of the New Yorker fiction podcast, which I've told you guys both about over the last like 2 months. It's like the go-to whenever I have something like a walk or whatever. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It's so fun.
That's great.
That's what I got.
Yeah, I need to check it out. I really want to listen to that Jennifer Egan episode about the Margaret Atwood book.
Yeah.
Or the Margaret Atwood story. Yeah. I got to check that one out. Well, I am reading Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. It was shortlisted for the Booker last year. I definitely recommend it. It's about a woman in her 60s who goes to live in a convent near her childhood home. She leaves her family and her life, I should say, but you don't really get any information on why or what was going on or her backstory. It's really a meditation on solitude and religion and community, and it's really somber and sparse and moody. It takes place in Australia during a mouse plague. So there's also a lot of like symbolism and metaphor at work, and it sort of gives me conclave vibes. It's somewhat about like the inner workings and relationships inside a convent. There's like petty jealousies and deep bonds that develop, but it's written from the perspective of her journal, and so it's very measured and quiet. And it's just really interesting window into why people might decide to live this way. And she's not religious, and it's just interesting to follow her in this journey. And the book is really well written, and it's a book about woman's interiority. So I'm into it, and I would recommend it for you guys. I think you'd like it. It's quiet. It's a nice kind of quiet book, which is good sometimes.
I have it. I have it on my bedside table. It was also a Booker shortlist finalist from last year.
Yeah.
So I have it. Yeah. I have it. And the next book I'm going to read after that is Nickel Boys, And I know, Brian, you love that movie, but I have read all his other books except that one, and I feel like I need to read it before I watch the movie.
Yeah, I want to do that too.
I really want to read it because the movie felt like a book in a way that most movies don't. And it made me that much more intrigued to check out the book. So maybe we'll all do that together. Maybe that's
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love that. That'd be fun.
Then you guys will be mad at me again, but
No, we can blame Brian for this one
I'm
because
used to
he
it.
saw the movie.
Okay.
So
All right,
he
good.
could take the heat for this one.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Should we get into Orbital?
We should do it.
Let's
make
do
our first
it.
orbit.
Let's go. Let's go into the cosmos. So Orbital is the shortest book to win the Booker Prize since the 1970s. It's the second shortest book of all time. It is the fifth novel by the British author Samantha Harvey, and she also wrote a memoir, which has one of the best titles ever. It's called The Shapeless Unease.
Ooh,
that is good. Yeah, she's
the imagery there.
so poetic. But this novel follows the lives of 6 people aboard a space station mission as it makes one full orbit around the sun. And each chapter of the novel covers a single 90-minute orbit around the Earth. So there are 16 orbits in the 24 hours. And the astronauts and cosmonauts are from 5 different countries. And we see the worlds they left behind on Earth through their stories and what they brought with them. But this book is really not about the characters, and it does not have any plot. It is a meditation on our planet viewed from a distance and reflections on what it means to be a human. And more than anything, Orbital is a poetic love letter to planet Earth. And that's where I wanted to start our conversation today. In an interview, Harvey says that she wanted to write a space pastoral. So instead of idealizing a rural or country life, she wanted to look at space that way and write about it realistically and romantically, focusing on the beauty. But also, really interestingly, she talked about how space stories are usually really dramatic and conflict driven and have to do with encountering alien life or power struggles in the universe. But a majority of our time in space as a civilization has not been dramatic. It's been routine and really observatory and almost voyeuristic. And it feels like that's what she was trying to tap into. And I think most people want to tell an epic story about space, but she manages to stick to the smallness of life on a space station and uses that to kind of juxtapose the vast unknowingness of the universe. And I find that really interesting. And so I wanted to talk to you both about this idea of a space pastoral and if that resonates with you or if that is something you thought about in any way when you were reading the book. RJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's if that's what she set out to do, she definitely accomplished her goal. I guess it's almost like a disrespectful to this book to try and like describe the language that she uses. It's like every paragraph has like something memorable. It's almost too much in that way. Like if you were like putting little post-it notes and interesting quotes, it would be every page of the whatever it is, 100 and something pages, right? It's like
Yeah, my book's all dog-eared. I like almost every page.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's extremely thoughtful, and like you said, meditative. So yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what it is. I don't know. I want to hear how you guys were left with it because I think we've talked about before. Like I guess books to me mostly matter in terms of how I think about them after and how much I think about them after. And I'm curious how long and how this book has sat with you all because I think for me it's probably different than you all, but the way that she describes the way that the earth looks from where they are and the way that they observe life from where they are it's amazing. I don't think anyone should try to do anything similar. I think this is like it in terms of that. They should just go back to like, aliens and like crash landings on Mars and stuff after this because I don't think you can do it better. I think this is it.
Yeah, well, she talks about, before we answer that question, as I really love that question, I did want to just talk about the language that when you were talking about, we'll talk about her poetics later, but she had mentioned that when you write a story without a plot or without a conflict to solve, that she wanted to bring the reader into a state of being spellbound, almost a suspension. And so this idea of suspense in a novel is usually brought on by not knowing what's going to happen. But she wanted to suspend you in a lyrical way, and she does that with the lyricism and the musicality of her language, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
What did you think about answer any of RJ's questions or what we were talking about, but what is resonating to you?
Well, I loved everything about this book. I love the entire experience of reading it. I read this towards the other part of this year while we were, just kind of hanging out with the holidays just ending, that kind of isolating, quiet renewal period that happens around New Year's. And it was just the perfect book to spend kind of an afternoon on the couch reading, a couple evenings here or there. It's an interesting point that RJ made, and I was thinking a lot about this as he was talking. The idea of, how much a book stays with you and what that impact is. Because I don't know how much this book really stayed with me, but I loved everything about it. And I loved like the choice she made to limit any sort of conflict or any sort of plot and really use this as, I think, Megan, you sold this to us as a love letter to Earth from space. Um, I definitely felt that while reading it. It got me thinking about a couple of my favorite movies that take place in space and like what do I like about art and film in space. And it made me think about the slow movements of something like 2001, that most of that movie is really about like, wow, this is what scale and silence and isolation feels like. And this is what the connective tissue between romanticism and music and, early space discovery. This is where like 300 years of history are blended together. It made me think of, a movie like Arrival, that so much of that movie is about communication and about language across species and across, various solar systems and where life comes from. It made me think of parts of Interstellar that are really quiet
Yeah.
and really contemplative and really human at their core. um and it also made me think of, have you guys ever heard of this idea of the Kardashev scale? Have you ever heard of this?
No.
No.
So it's a way to measure. It's a Soviet scientist measurement of civilization, and essentially where humans are on Earth right now, according to the scale, is at like 0.77. And there's 5 tiers to this. It goes from uh, control over your immediate planet all the way up to the idea that you have control over multiple universes. And it goes through these like various technological breakthroughs and proposes like how long it would take for humans to get to a certain point in time. And the estimation is that we will become a type 1 civilization sometime in the 22nd century. And what that ultimately would mean is that we have fully renewable energy sources. We're able to send many, many people out beyond Earth. But like Earth is a fully renewable hub of energy and life. And we've gotten past, fossil fuels into a place where there's no concern whatsoever for life and death necessarily on Earth, that we can use this planet, but reuse it as well. And then it goes to controlling your solar system, controlling your galaxy, so on and so forth. And it got me thinking about how like where we're at right now is at this fascinating place where, for thousands and millions of years, we were confined to the planet. And we're so amazed that we can build a spaceship that can hover over the planet and we can study the planet from afar. But we're still at that place where we are just so amazed by it that like so much of this book is not necessarily about the exploration beyond Earth. It's like we just got above Earth and let's look down and be totally blown away and in love with this planet that we came from. And so it got me thinking about a lot of things. I'll throw it back to you guys because I don't know if I answered any of RJ's questions. I'll just reiterate. I loved this book, and I I thought about it as much in the last like 2 hours as I did when I was reading it, but like I didn't think about it as much in between. I just loved the feeling I had while I was reading it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of how I feel. But Megan, I'm curious if you were the same or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I read this book last, I think December, and when I actually maybe even earlier, maybe October, November, and when I went back to prep for this episode to think about it, I remembered very little of the specifics about it because it is hypnotic and trance-like and spellbinding, but it's not necessarily something you retain in the sense of characters or plot or things like that. To me, it's more of a feeling and an idea. And because it's so poetic, to me, it very much feels like the way that you feel when you read poetry, which is a really intense feeling for a really short amount of time. And it's I feel like her writing is almost more like painting. I think she feels very like cross-disciplinary to me, and that I feel like she's really painting this picture for you to live inside of in a way that I haven't really read a lot of writers like this. I think she's very singular in that way. I think you're right, RJ. She has an ability to do something that very few people can do. Very few people can write a novel without a plot in it. And I think that for me, what's really stuck with me is the singularity of the work and also the poeticness of the work. And looking back on it, I don't think I've ever read an author that writes this poetically, that writes a novel this poetically. I think, her language is incredibly heightened. And like you were saying, RJ, there's like something you can kind of check on every page, but it's her prose is really repetitive and looping in a way. And she uses a ton of metaphor, and all of her metaphors they're kind of layered on top of each other. So they become really dense and really rich, which is just incredible. At one point she compares Earth to an exalted lover looking back up at you. And I think you're right, Brian, in the sense of like the book is not really about looking out towards space, but reflecting back on home. And to me, that's really interesting. And I also thought about Interstellar too, but in a different way. I was thinking about how there is a thread in this book about this idea of being tethered to home, but then also having this ambition to see what's out there and explore. And I feel like she wrestles with that really well in how she has the stories presented from home of the astronauts and what they're thinking about at home and missing and not missing, and this sense of wistfulness. At one point, they're talking about that they miss rugs, and they're talking about lying on the rug and what they would do on a rug, and they're laughing about it and they're dreaming about it, and it has this sense of glorifying those small things that make humanness really interesting and amazing, and also making it very beautiful and poetic. And I think having that ability to kind of roam around in the thoughts of these people is really beautiful. And the last thing I wanted to say, Brian, about what you were saying about this scale, which I find really interesting because I've never heard that before. But this idea, she talks about humanity, she compares it to a single life, that it's growing out of the royalty of childhood into supreme normalcy, which I think is so cool to think about childhood as this royalty, right? When everyone's taking care of you and doting on you and you're the center of the universe. And then as you grow older, you realize that you're just one of everybody else. And that's kind of what humanity's realizing, is that we're all just one of a bunch of people. And that she says that humankind is right now, and it's like smash it all up teenage years, the years of like self-harm and nihilism. And that was so fascinating to me because I haven't really heard anybody compare this time period to that. And she has this quote of whether that's enough or whether our tendency towards just growing and consuming will outweigh our generosity and cooperation. And I was really thinking so much about that. And that's interesting with what you're saying about this idea of, obviously those heightened civilizations have learned to work together, right? Or they wouldn't accomplish that. And I think she's thinking a lot about this in this novel.
Yeah, I think that there's because reading the book, it reminds me of that feeling you get if you're ever on a plane, like in the early morning, and suddenly the
Yeah.
world feels very peaceful and quiet, and you suddenly have that really like heightened sense of being pretty insignificant in the whole thing, but a part of it at the same time. And that feeling to me is one of the only things I enjoy about flying. And you kind of got that throughout this book. I think also just to kind of dive into it, like memories I have coming back from it. Um, one of the early moments in the book that really struck me and kind of speaks to what we're talking about here was how they talk about, and this is very obvious, but the way she describes it just hit me, that you're going over the earth, it's 16 times in a 24-hour period. And if you go over a section of the earth during the daytime, you would have no idea that people actually live below. It looks like a completely desolated planet. There's no, she hits at home that like they're really not that far above the earth when all is
Yeah.
said and done. Um, but it looks like a completely desolated planet. Um, and then at night, all the lights come on, and when you travel over these places at night, you suddenly realize how much life there is and how much is happening, how much we've built as a civilization. And that sort of sentiment really hit in terms of what she was going after, because she was kind of just giving you this truly observational view of humanity from small perspectives, seeing the earth shape and evolve and twist and turn as one day goes by, which gives you both a sense of like there's so much happening below, but also from this initial pocket of space, there's so much more out here, that whatever's happening here, it feels like everything, but it's actually it's insignificant in the whole grand scheme of things. And that whole idea is, I think, really hard to write about without sounding um without like dipping into cliches. And she did it in
Yeah.
a way that felt real, it felt authentic, it felt like a necessary part of the story.
Yeah, I think she does that so well. This idea of the smallness in the universe, like that we're so small in the universe. And she's constantly putting these two ideas up against each other, the fragility and the smallness of being human, and humans' ego and how fragile that is, up against the vastness and the enormity of space. But somehow she does it without making you feel hopeless. And I don't
Yeah.
really know how. Like that's just so incredible. But I think it's because she also spends time thinking about what it means to be human. There's I think when you put a character in a place that's so foreign, there's immediately a reflection on what it means to be a human, and she's putting them in a place where even their bodies don't work right, and so it really makes you think about what it means to be a human. I love this one part she's talking about Pietro, who's, like, supposed to be kind of the engine or the heart of the crew because he's the ultimate astronaut. He's the Italian astronaut, and he has this, like, ultimate sense of calm, and she was talking about how he can steady his heart and be so relaxed and never get nervous. But she says that even his heart tilts and pitches. It wants what it wants, hopes what it hopes, needs what it needs, and loves what it loves. And so she still has his humanity pushing up against him, even though he is this consummate astronaut. And the idea that what makes us human is unsuppressible, even in the places where it's inhospitable, we still remain human, to me just gave me so much hope, and I found that really, really beautiful.
I think I agree with everything you guys are saying. Can I like offer some perspective on why I think this book didn't stick with me longer?
Yeah, please
Please.
do.
Because I think the And maybe I'm just not good at like meditations, although it's interesting because the book I just mentioned, which I do think is pretty similar from this, but more kind of romantic and less about it's different. But these like the characters and the plot are also, I mean, they're like you said, there is no real plot, but to the degree that there is anything, it's really it's all kind of floating. It's all suspended. So like the
Yes.
characters are kind of suspended along with whatever's happening. I don't remember now that you mentioned that one character's name, like now I remember that that was a person, but like I think there was a Japanese woman, but besides
She
that, like I
mhm.
don't know anyone. I wouldn't ever think about a character from the book, you know?
No,
And
I
I
had
think
to look
that's
it up.
so I guess that's it is more like a long poem in that way. Not that there can't be characters in poems, but it's like there isn't really a something to hold on to, and I think that's intentional probably, but I also think that's what makes it more like fleeting is that
Mhm.
there aren't characters to go back to. There's not like you know, a climax or a precipitating event to go back to. It's sort of like it's all just hanging out there, and I think in the way that she intended it to be. So that's great. But it feels to me like that's partially why maybe we all hadn't thought about it until we started prepping for this again. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I like basically like
No,
we need those things to hold on to for longer term.
I agree with that fully, and I mean, as you were talking, it kind of makes me think about how this feels like the interstellar version of Northwoods, where the experience of the book is the place that you're in and the movement that's happening in time as it's
Yeah.
unwinding. Obviously, this is a much smaller window of time. The difference obviously is like there are probably 6 characters from Northwoods that like I could recount in detail of like what happened. And I'm the same way with you. I remember that there's a Japanese woman. I think it's the same person, maybe different, whose mother is dying on Earth. I remember the
Yeah, sure.
typhoon that is about to hit the Philippines, and that whole experience of them watching from afar and wondering how do we send help and can we send help? Is there anything that we can do? Um, but beyond that, it's a lot of like memories of a paragraph beginning and her describing what it was like to ascend and reach, Western Europe or the Sahara or, these various places on Earth that you're now visualizing. Um, and I did a lot of like, as I was reading this, I would just jump on Google and be like, this area from space, because I just was fast.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good
I
idea.
love I love maps and I love the idea of like what all this looks like from afar. And so like why like that imagery just like hit me really hard as I was reading it. I guess the best comparison I can make for this book is that it's like a really great ambient album. Almost in the way that like Brian Eno's Music for Airports is,
Yeah.
where I mean I've listened to that record hundreds of times, and that has like like melodies that you really hold on to. But part of the point of that record and of that style of music in general is that it's there, it hangs with you, and then you kind of move on with your day. And
Yes.
that can either work or it can't. And I think that this book could have not worked at all because of that. But I think her commitment to just keeping you in this space as the space station is moving, as it's orbiting the Earth, as thoughts are coming and going, complements it really nicely, and for me, made up for anything that might have been lost by not having like a character or plot to hang on to.
Yeah, and I think for me, I love that. Like, I wanna support massive creativity in art, so when I see something that's not following the same structure as everything else I read, or something that maybe is meant to be fleeting, that to me is fantastic. Like, I think it's similar to I like that music comp, Brian, and I also like when you go see a really great piece of art, you might not think about it every day or remember what you loved about it, but there's something so rich in that moment that that is really hard to describe and intense. And I think that this book is like that. And I think I really can't think of very many books that are as meditative like this and as all consuming. But I definitely agree, harder to hold on to. Do you think that she wrote the typhoon in there because she needed something kind of to hold on to? Because that is kind of the one major event in the book that they kind of return back to and that they're thinking about, and that sets off storylines about one of the characters has some people he met on vacation that live there in the
Yeah.
Philippines. And I always just wondered if the typhoon was something that she did in an effort to do that. When she was speaking about it in an interview, she was saying that she wanted to have something that they could view as moving across the earth. And so she thought about a herd of animals or something big like that, but decided that a weather pattern would be more interesting. And because you could see it over multiple orbits. But do you think
Yeah.
that the book like needed that or
Well,
would have been less without it?
I didn't really remember that until you mentioned it. So I guess, but again, I feel like I'm like bad at this book generally. So I'm sorry to Samantha
No, you're
Harvey. But
not.
I guess I have a question about this as it relates to what you were just saying, Megan, which is like, why so many characters from so many different cultures as part of this, as opposed to one person, like what I guess what I couldn't really figure out like what that did for it, because it kind of made me more confused at times that we were like, I guess it's just to show different perspectives, but it's like Anton and Roman and Nell and Sean and Pietro, and they're all kind of doing the same thing, but they have slightly different perspectives on everything, and they play different roles, obviously. So maybe it just wouldn't have been realistic to have one person like in a spaceship by themselves. But when I started it, I kind of thought like, okay, so there's like the Russian American thing, there's like the Japanese, there's cultural differences, there's political and geopolitical differences, and I kind of thought that's where we would see some of the conflict between the characters, but there really wasn't. And so I'm just wondering, like, why do you guys think that she went in that direction, and what does that do for the book? Because the typhoon is something that they all kind of experience differently.
My take was almost in the sense, and I think it's related to the typhoon, that when you get to like these people have reached basically the culmination of their career. Like this is the goal, is to be on this space station doing this. But they're still leaving the confines of Earth. Their bodies are being impacted dramatically. They're, um, they are leaving behind family members emotionally. This is impacting them on a really incredible basis every time that they leave to go to space. I almost felt like the geopolitical conflicts and the interpersonal conflicts that would come out of a work environment, an intense work environment like this, are deliberately removed because you're to understand that what these people are going through is something such a small percentage of humans have ever experienced and most likely will experience until this becomes more normalized, combined with the fact that like they're looking down on earth and they can see something that a country like the Philippines is obviously well connected to the internet and news media and whatnot. So like there's going to be reports of a typhoon coming, but these are the first people to see it and they can't do anything about it. And so there's this lack of ability to even help people, that any sort of like interpersonal conflict and cross cultures, what does that even serve? Because we literally are like observing death moving its way across the ocean towards a population of people, and we can't help anyone there. So like I guess like it kind of gave me this sense of just like awe, but also removal from the human experience and the earthly experience, um that allowed for any sort of lack of conflict on board. I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think for me, I saw that it was two things. I think there were a bunch of nations represented because that's a lot of the times the way space stations work, and
Right.
also representing that this is something that did happen, and in the book, it's actually coming to an end, right? This is like the end of the space station era, and it represents international cooperation and in a way that I think she's making a political statement about. You know, a lot of the book is not a lot of the book, but there is the thread of climate change as a theme in the book. And I think she's making a comment too about the ability of people to work together in a way that, you know, maybe they're not doing anymore.
Yeah, that like cross-cultural unity that maybe she's yeah, I mean this book was written in 2023, so a lot of the conflicts we're seeing right now were happening then, and like the ideas of them and the potential were, this idea of like we need to share in all the successes and failures of Earth as a universe, as a global population. You can feel that slipping away as you're reading through this book and as you're going through the experience.
Yeah, and I think like you know, you guys all know this. I'm sure anyone who listens to this would know this, but like anything we do is affected by climate, and especially if you look at it on a global level, migration, natural resources, weather, obviously, like all these things are affected. So like maybe I hadn't thought about that maybe since I read it or at all, Megan, but maybe that is part of the point is like these things are all looking so much different now than they would have, 50 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one thing that I can't decide if I love about the book or don't like about the book. This idea that when you step back from something really far, it's can often seem beautiful and freeing the perspective. Everything seems less complicated. Like you said, Brian, when you're in an airplane, that feeling of being removed from everything and how peaceful everything looks below, and you know it's not. And how when you're down on earth, you're focused on these day-to-day challenges and frustrations and things feel really small and hard, but when you step back, you can see things differently. So this book kind of reminded me about that ability to step back and have a larger perspective, but they're doing that from earth, right? And they're watching earth and they're thinking about earth being really far away from the day-to-day kind of issues about it. And I know there was a lot of pushback, maybe not a lot, but pushback online about the way the Russians are represented in this book because of the Ukrainian conflict and an idea of supporting the Russian perspective, which I don't necessarily agree with in the sense that I think we need to think about all perspectives of humans regardless of where they come from. But it did there is a sense of removal, right, from the day-to-day world. And I think that that is kind of also why maybe the story is not as sticky in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my pushback to I'm not saying you're saying this, but like my pushback to that
Yeah.
idea is like, would this book have been better if it had been doubled in size and you had all of the, exposition and, all the descriptions of setting and place, and then in between each of these like orbit chapters, there were like deep dives into interpersonal conflicts. Like, I don't know how much that book has improved.
No.
If there's like a
No.
winner or a loser in this, I feel like the winner of this story, like the what you're rooting for is humanity, and what you're fearing at the same time is humanity. Like it's a really
Yeah.
great kind of poetic testament to what we can create and how at risk we are. And part of that is, in what these people's bodies go through
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
mentally what they go through
So
being in
Yeah.
cool.
That's
space. Like,
interesting.
like you really get this sense of like, you just like go 100 miles north, up above you, and you literally can't survive. Like, you're not supposed to survive there. Like, we're not meant to be there. And you really get a sense of how fragile everything is. And I don't want to sound trite or melodramatic, but like, I feel like this book does that without saying repeatedly you know, um, how fragile this entire system is and everything that we have in place is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the point about like the Russian point of view, that just seems like, are we really like, we're going to equate like people with all of their leaders? So
I
now
know.
Americans, we are Donald Trump. Like,
Right.
Yeah,
that's unfortunate.
exactly. I know. I think
You
it's
guys-
just, yeah, it's
You guys
unfortunate.
I think, Brian, we've talked about this. Maybe we've all talked about this, but I was traveling in Turkey in 2007, and like every person I met was like, "So you like George Bush?" You know, because that was the
Yeah.
impression, was like every American like was like the president, which just seems like a really unfair criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah. When were you in Turkey in 2007? I was in Turkey in 2007.
I think we've talked about this.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure we've
We'll,
talked about
we'll
it.
hash this out
We will.
offline, but
We
like,
will.
my goodness, there's
August.
nothing like, okay, I was there in October. There's nothing like olives and feta and cucumbers and tomatoes for breakfast every morning while overlooking the Bosphorus Sea. I'll tell you what.
My favorite kind of food. Yum.
Yeah.
My God.
I've always wanted to go to Turkey. I've never been there.
That's great.
I should have gone when I was living over in London, because I was choosing between going to Budapest and Istanbul, and I went to Budapest, but I kind of wish I'd gone to Istanbul because it seems harder to get to now. But
I think both are pretty challenging right now. I always wanted to
Yeah.
do Budapest as well. And I mean, I think that like, it's funny we stumbled upon this. Like, I said it before, but like I'll say it again. Like the description of the Earth from above and of the various ecological, differences from landmass and how water and land meet each other, and you know it's like an hour and a half each orbit. So
I
like,
think it's 90
when
minutes. Yeah.
90 minutes, yes. Like when they come across the southern part and they start going up, like it's not a long period in time that they're experiencing one section of the earth, and you get this sense of how small but also how big it is, because it does take 16 trips around there. I don't know, just like really, really hit home for someone who is just kind of interested in all different areas of this planet.
Fascinating. There's another thing that the astronauts talk about at one point. I wanted to ask you about it if it hit you guys. This idea that being in space and looking at the Earth from this vantage point could prove that there was a God, and also prove that there wasn't, kind of depending on who's deciding that. And they get into this conversation and they're talking about, is it a heedless or a heedful force that made this? Is it something that happened by art or by design? And I found that really hard. Like, I have always thought that about religion, but I found it really hard to articulate. And I really loved these conversations that they had between the believer and the non-believer. And I found them to be really compelling, and the kind of stuff that I love when books like this get into. Is that something you thought about when you were reading?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think what it does really well is it doesn't really plant a flag. It just lets
Yeah.
you. I think this probably annoyed some people when they were reading, because I think they want, a certain type of reader will want where do we stand? And I think that where she stands as she's writing this is, a lot of this is up to your own interpretation, because when you're at this level of humanity, and when you're removed from humanity, and also like on the technological and scientific frontier of where we are at as a civilization, it's really hard not to think about this sort of stuff. So I think it was just kind of one of those, like a lot of this book, I was just cruising through it because I could not stop reading. But I
Mhm.
had enough moments like that where I thought about the bigger picture of things, because this book just allows your brain to move quickly, but also kind of stand in place. Kind of in the same
Yeah.
way that like you're on the spaceship that's moving really quickly, but you're also standing in place. So like, the debates between religion or non-religion. Um, I mean, I've certainly always thought about that. I've landed on both sides of that conversation from time to time at various points in my life. I think that it does a really good job of, if you want to believe that this is all by design, there's enough in the writing that you could walk away and say some being had to create all of this. But if you want to believe that this is all, just evolution as it is, there's enough in it that gives you a sense of mistakes that lead to something else, and beauty that's unexplainable, and horror that's unjustifiable, and all of these things that happen as humans evolve. There's enough in there that she locks in on that I think you could walk away being both satisfied with your preconceptions, but also challenged.
RJ, did that
Did you feel that too, RJ?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it seemed to me that like the entire thing was maybe what was so artful about it is that it's so like without a point in a way, like you can like
right
you
without
can
a decision on either side?
yeah, you can draw like what you want from it, which I think is really amazing. It makes like when you think about it in that way, it makes like a plot driven book like so clunky in a way. It's like, here you go, here's the stuff that happens, and here's what you're supposed to see and think from these different perspectives, and like laying it all out, feels like kind of like doing a disservice to like language. It's not the way that I think about books, but I think if you think about it in that way, it's a pretty big accomplishment,
I found myself having a lot of time to think while I was reading this book.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we talked a lot about that. I think I mentioned on another episode, I don't remember which book we were talking about, that I don't think as much while I'm reading about themes, but this book was the total opposite. Like, I was thinking so deeply about themes while I was reading it, and thinking, and I think it is from that space, that weightlessness and that suspension she gives you. It allows you to think deeply while you're reading in a way that is really incredible, because you're not holding on to plot and you're not just thinking about what next. And I think that's a huge gift when you're reading. And I think one way that she does that is how she plays with time. And Brian, when you were talking about the orbits taking 90 minutes, the thing about writing that's so amazing is that you can, go thousands of years in a few pages, or you can spend an entire book on a few moments. And I think she plays with time in a really interesting way in this book. And that allows you to feel lost in the moment in a way that I rarely feel when I read.
Megan, is it possible to talk about the Booker Prize at this stage?
Yeah, let's do it. It was a
Because
unanimous vote.
It was a unanimous vote, and I think we all know this, but just to repeat. So the final, or the short list for the prize was James, Orbital, Creation Lake, Held, Stoneyard Devotional, and Safekeep. So I've read all of
Incredible
those
list.
except Stoneyard Devotional, which I'm about to read. I think it is crazy that this book beat out Safekeep. I
You
think
think
like
Safekeep should have won?
I think Safekeep should have won. I think
Better
it's
than
like
James?
I think so. James is great, but it also is like, I don't know. The more time that goes by, the more I would have, like, if I were on the panel, I would have voted for Safekeep
Yeah,
over James.
I
I
would
don't
have
like
too.
how do you guys feel about that? Like, and unanimous is pretty interesting.
Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's tough because these are my two favorite books I've read this year thus far, for very different reasons,
Yeah.
but also for kind of like similar reasons. Like they accomplish two very different things. Obviously, the Safekeep is much more plot driven and much more character driven than this book is. But like when I read both of them, I had that, you really can't predict when this is going to happen, but that sense of like, I don't ever want this book to end. So, I guess if we're getting into like the thematic side of it and who's more deserving and this and that, like I think what this book accomplishes that would have me kind of, vote for this book for the Booker Prize, is the sense of humanity, this like shared sense of community, but also this sense of awe at our differences and our shared differences, all with what is in common with us. Um, I think where I would vote for the safe keep is the sense of taking a well-worn plot device, which is World War II recovery and trauma from World War II. Like, there's probably thousands more books that have, well, actually, I wonder if there are more science fiction books or more,
Yeah.
you know, dramatic retellings of World War II out there. That'd be an
Totally.
interesting thing to explore. But like that book takes an idea that is so well worn, and reinvents it in a way that I never really knew possible, while also focusing on these like two people's relationship and connection and crisis. You almost can think about it in the sense of the Oscars this year, that like Honora is almost like the safe keep, where it's a human, it's a personal story. Something like The Brutalist, which I loved as well. It's a very much of a personal story, but it also is this like big telling story of humanity, of creation. Um, and it's interesting that both of these prizes kind of went to two different types of stories. I don't think they did anything wrong here. I think that I think both were willing, or would have been correct winners. I haven't read any other of the Booker long list besides James, so I can't totally comment. But I'm curious your thoughts, Meg.
I think this was the right call. I totally agree. Safekeep is number 2 for me. I've only read James Stoneyard devotional. I have like 10 pages left of that. And Orbital and Safekeep. But the Safekeep, the longer, it's kind of the opposite experience for me. The longer time goes by after reading that book, the more I think about it, which is to me just incredible. And after our conversation and thinking about that book and revisiting it again, I am absolutely blown away by the Safekeep. And there's a whole episode we did on it, so you know we really loved it. But this book to me was unlike anything else I've maybe ever read. And that's what I'm always looking for in art, is something that kind of knocks me over and just makes me feel like I've never felt that way before. And it happens very rarely. And Safekeep is kind of the ultimate of everything I want a book to be. It's my favorite kind of story. It's so enrapturing in a million ways, and it's exactly what I want so many books to read. But this book is just so unexpected. I don't really like books about space. I don't read science fiction.
Yeah.
I'm not into space. I've never been into space really. But for some reason, this book took my breath away. And so for me, I'm not surprised it won, because these people read so many books, and then they read a book that is like nothing else. To me, it kind of makes sense why it would win.
I get that.
Yeah. But I did want to ask you guys about space, and if there are other books about space you've loved. Have you been interested in space? Is this a thing that you like? I've only watched movies about space, which they have to be really good for me to be into, but I'm not really a space person. Are you guys into space? Astronaut dreams, either of you?
I'll go first because it's short. No.
Same. Brian?
Deeply.
It's so shocking. It's so surprising. I can't believe this.
I love it.
Like, yeah, very much so. Not as well read as I should be, to be completely honest. It's I have a few, like I have The Expanse on my list to read. I have a book that I'm blanking on the title that my brother-in-law keeps recommending about humanity like 300 years in the future, where we are mining the asteroid belt, and that whole experience. Probably my favorite period thus far of being a parent was my son went to a Montessori preschool, and like the way that they would set things up and like teach kids is like they would introduce a new topic each month. And if like the majority of the kids were into that topic, they would just keep it going. And in August 2019, they introduced space as an idea for the kids. And it like I went back home and got all of my space books, and we started like doing YouTube deep dives. And as like a family, we were just like completely consumed by his education. And to me, the idea of like both the smallness of things, how slow moving things are, um, the idea of extraterrestrial life, the idea of different chemical compounds that can, lead to a completely different evolution on a different planet in a different solar system. It blows me away to no end. My boss here at the university sends out a mailer every month of great space articles and insights. Like I'm totally into it. So this book spoke deeply to me. This book also, if I can make the comparison once again to a movie. I know this is a movie that Megan just watched as well. Um, Koyaanisqatsi is a movie I watched
Yeah.
recently, again for the first time since high school, I want to say. And it's a movie, I think it translates to life out of balance, translated from Hopi. And it's from like the early 80s. Coppola had something to do with it. It's basically like, um, it tracks the Earth's evolution from pre-human to modernity in the course of like an hour and 10 minutes with Philip Glass soundtrack behind it. And it's some of the most fascinating cinematography of Earth without humans, and then as humans evolve and take over the Earth. And this book really reminded me of that feeling that I had watching that, where like this book felt so cinematic and felt both like it's stuck between this idea of humans are destroying the planet and humans are a natural evolutionary offshoot of the planet that will continue to evolve long beyond us. I talked about the scale element early on. So like I felt I got a lot of similarities between that. And I just love the idea that like we're all rooted on this planet, but this planet is literally, the pale blue dot image of it. Like we are just hanging in a sun glaze or sun gaze, that, you get millions and millions of miles away from here and nobody has any idea that the Beatles existed.
Someday maybe they will. Wasn't there recently detection faint off of there was life detected the
99
possibilities, right? Of life.
99.7% confirmation that life exists on I think it's a hot Jupiter planet, like 4.5 light years away, something like that. I don't know. I'm probably way off on that, but like, yeah, it's the first we've ever really like been
Mhm.
as sure as possible that there's life outside of here.
I just have a hard time conceptualizing space. And I don't have a super scientific brain, and sometimes I just can't understand the scale. It's
Yeah,
the same way when my daughter comes home and tries to explain a physics theory to me, and I just cannot understand it. There's just certain things about the scale of space that I just don't understand. But that movie is an awesome comp, Brian, because it's so meditative and hypnotic, and how it speeds up at the end. And once all the people are there, and it just becomes so frantic, and it's overwhelming and incredible and really, really great. I would highly recommend it. I was thinking about Interstellar a lot when I was watching this, and also thinking about this is super random, but my daughter and I watched It's a Wonderful Life recently again, and this idea of the desire to learn and experience life butting up against duty. And I feel like that was something they talked a lot about in this book in an interesting way. But I had one other book I wanted to recommend that is really different, but very meditative. I don't know if you've ever read this, you guys, but it's Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life by William Finnegan. And it
no,
is an amazing memoir about surfing. I have only been surfing a few times. I absolutely loved it. I don't have a chance to do it often, but whenever I do, I do try to do it. And it's so hard, but it is so when you catch it, it's so magical and it has that weightlessness and that suspension and that floating feeling. And he writes about surfing and he spends a couple years just like gives up on his life and just surfs. And it is absolutely breathtaking how he writes about surfing and the ocean and being outside and riding a wave. And I've just never read a book that taught me so much about something that I don't know about and made me feel like I was doing it in the same way that Orbital made me feel like I was in space, even though I know nothing about it. So I'd recommend that book.
We'll add it to the list. Library
to the
card
list.
2027. We'll be there
Yeah,
soon.
that would be really cool. I'd have to read it again. I read it a long time ago. And I also would say if you liked the meditative quality of this book, you should read more poetry. And so my recommendation is reading Bluets by Maggie Nelson. It's just come out recently. It's beautiful. It's about falling in love with a color and it's gorgeous. So I'm hoping you guys will read that at some point. Can't wait.
I have one. This is one kind of slightly weird recommendation to make based off of this.
Okay, I'm into that.
This is another movie. I'm breaking the fourth wall. Apologies. You bring your books. I bring my movies. I just rewatched. This is like to a specific point of what we were talking about. I just rewatched Amadeus, which has nothing to do with outer space, but it does raise this question. I don't know. You guys have probably seen it, but probably not for a long time. It holds up and then some. I highly recommend watching it again. It brings up this question throughout of if there is a God, what is God trying to accomplish, and what is God trying to message to us as we evolve as humans? And so much of it is based in the fact that for all we know, the perception of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is this person who was incredibly childish, addicted to sex, food, the good life in a very childish and immature way. And yet, when he sat down to write music, he heard and visualized and saw music in a way nobody could. And so, the main character of this book is told through, or of this movie is told by, Salieri, I think is what his name is, who works high up in the government in Vienna, and he's, I think, the court pianist, the court composer, and he's got this amazing job based on his musical talent, but he hears Mozart and realizes, I'm nothing. I'm literally like, you've reached the highest point in your career, and you are now, in the same city at the same time as, not even generational, like, humanity level musician. And his question throughout the movie is like, why did God choose this person? And so, it makes me think about like the conversation
Yeah.
we were having earlier about like, these questions that come up as they're orbiting Earth of, is this created? Is this all evolved? Like, it really gets down to this like core of, if there is a higher being, like what is the point of it? When, like, as we learn more and more about our place in the known universe, and you go back to the late 18th century, the idea of leaving the Earth was, there's no conceptual reality that was ever going to happen. Here now, we are separated. These questions become that much more complicated because we've seen what humans can do, but now we're seeing what the universe actually is as a whole. And so, anyway, just
All right,
watch
I'm
more
adding that
great
to my
movies as
list.
well.
Yeah.
Nice.
We'll be
what are your
covering that on
comps?
Blockbuster Card next week.
Oh, only I just want to mention Held one more time, that you guys would both like it. It's Anne Michaels, who's she's written a bunch of books. She was also like the poet laureate of Canada. So she's a poet, and it's written in a similar way, but like much shorter passages in between perspectives of characters. It's like a 4 generations of time. Starts in 1917 on a battlefield in World War I in France, and it's kind of about like a lot of it's about like World War I and then World War II aftermath, and it's really like every page there's something, and It's pretty wild, but really memorable. So I would recommend that. It reminds me a lot of this book.
Nice. I've never read that.
That's all I got.
I'm adding it to the list right now. Our list continues to grow and grow. Is there anything else we didn't get to talk about that you guys want to say before we leave the cosmos?
Just read this book.
Yes,
Just read
definitely.
it.
Definitely
Yeah.
read this book. It's not
It
going
won't
to
take you
a long
long.
time. Yeah.
There we go. There we go.
It's short. It's like, yes, this is so what we want from art. Just like hit us hard really quickly. That's what we need more of. And we're going to be back next week. We're going to be talking about the Stag Dance novella, the novel inside the short story collection by Tori Peters, which we've been talking about a few of her other stories. And we're going to talk about that next week. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoyed our trip to the cosmos. We'll be back next week. We're going to go to the interior of the country, to God's country, to talk about cross-dressing lumberjacks. So we'll see you then. And thanks, everyone.